The scene that I chose from the reader to analyze was the first argument between Hannah and Michael following their streetcar interaction, where Hannah had gotten upset because Michael stayed in the second streetcar, and she assumed that because he did that, he didn't want to know her. And I chose the scene specifically because when Michael tries to apologize to her for making her upset, she responds by saying, "You don't have the power to upset me." And psychologically speaking, in this situation, we can see that Hannah is manipulating Michael. She's doing so by taking advantage of the love that he has for her and the emotional immaturity that comes along with only being 15. So he doesn't understand the gravity of the situation and the manipulation that's ensuing. And so she does this to turn the situation around and belittle him in a way and make him feel unimportant because she had felt uncomfortable with the vulnerability that was being shown in the situation by her being upset by his actions. And so we can kind of see Hannah resort back to that authoritarian style by shifting the power back into her hands because she felt powerless that Michael had the ability to upset her. And with that being said, I think this scene is representative of the interactions between the generations post war because I feel like the older generation would become dismissive of the younger generation whenever they had opinions about what had happened. Um, so I would say that I think the younger generation would tell them like, hey, like you were complicit, like what you did was wrong, and the older generation would reply by saying, oh, like you weren't even there, like you weren't born yet, or you're too young to remember, so you can't speak on these things, which is comparable to Hannah saying, you don't have the power to upset me. The older generation would say things like, you don't have this power to speak up on this, or you don't have the power to like really do anything, your opinion doesn't matter. um, and I feel like with this scene it also made me think about the inherited responsibility that the younger generation feels. And I think that the younger generation saw this inhumane thing that the generation before them had done, and they assumed that all of their parents were complicit in what had happened, and they had such a grotesque and disgusted view of their parents for being complicit. And I think that's why this responsibility became so heavy on that generation, because they looked at their parents in such a disgusted way that they didn't want anyone else to look at them in the same manner. So they took it in the forms of justice, like we need to acknowledge this and say that what had happened was horrible instead of brushing it under the rug, because in their eyes being complicit is just as guilty as being the perpetrator. And I think with this responsibility and this fight for justice, they're trying to switch the narrative for future generations so that they're not associated with the events of the Holocaust and people don't look at them as disgustingly as they view their parents.